Solve this, and you walk with $155 million. The Arab billionaire's words dripped with contempt, but Maya the maid didn't flinch. Outside, the Manhattan skyline glittered, oblivious. This wasn't just some tech puzzle. It was a cage. She knew that algorithm intimately. Her fingerprints were all over its original design. Funny how life twists. He sees a cleaner, a nobody. He has no idea it was stolen from her. He thinks money buys everything. Soon he'll learn that even billions can't compete with a woman reclaiming her stolen genius. Her quiet dignity, it hides a storm he's about to unleash. Please like and comment if you're enjoying this incredible love story. Your engagement helps us bring you more amazing romantic tales. The 68th floor of Al Rashid Financial Tower buzzed with the kind of tension that only accompanied billion-dollar disasters. Khalil Al Rashid stood behind his mahogany desk, his dark eyes scanning the panoramic view of Manhattan, as if the city itself could provide answers to the algorithmic nightmare that had been plaguing his company for 3 months. At 34, Khalil had built his empire from inherited oil money into a technological powerhouse that dominated markets across 4 continents. His perfectly tailored Armani suit, worth more than most people's annual salary, couldn't hide the frustration radiating from his 6-foot frame. The stubble on his sharp jawline suggested sleepless nights, though his pride would never let him admit defeat. "Sir, the development team is requesting another meeting," his assistant Marcus announced from the doorway, his voice carefully neutral. Everyone knew better than to push their demanding boss when he was in this mood. "Tell them I don't want excuses. I want solutions," Khalil snapped, his slight accent making the words sound even more dismissive. "We've thrown $50 million at this problem. Our stock price has dropped 12%. And still, no one can crack this algorithm." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Khalil alone with his mounting anger. The quantum encryption protocol his company desperately needed remained unsolved. Despite hiring the best minds money could buy, MIT graduates, Stanford PhDs, former NASA engineers, all had failed spectacularly. Through his floor-to-ceiling windows, he watched the city that never slept, oblivious to his billion-dollar headache. The irony wasn't lost on him that the man who could buy anything couldn't purchase the one thing he needed most, a solution. The soft sound of a vacuum cleaner humming in the outer office broke through his brooding. Khalil glanced at his PC Philippi watch. 11:47 p.m. The cleaning crew was making their nightly rounds, invisible workers who maintained the pristine environment where fortunes were made and lost. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, expecting Marcus with more bad news. Instead, a young woman entered, pushing a cart loaded with cleaning supplies. She moved with quiet efficiency, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing the standard gray uniform of the cleaning company. Something about her posture caught his attention. She carried herself with a dignity that seemed oddly out of place. "I'm sorry, Mr. Al-Rashid," she said, her voice surprisingly clear and educated. "I can come back later if you prefer." Khalil studied her for a moment. Most cleaning staff avoided eye contact with executives, but this woman looked directly at him with intelligent brown eyes that held no trace of intimidation. "Interesting. No, go ahead," he said, turning back to his computer screen, where lines of impossible code mocked him. "I'll be here all night anyway." As she began dusting his bookshelf with methodical precision, Khalil found himself stealing glances at her. There was something almost meditative about her movements, as if she found peace in creating order from chaos. Unlike the frazzled energy of his highly paid employees, she radiated a calm competence that was oddly soothing. "You work late hours," he observed, more to distract himself from his problems than out of genuine interest. "Night shift pays better," she replied without looking up, "and it's quieter, less complicated." Something in her tone suggested she knew about complications. Khalil found himself curious despite himself. "What's your name?" "Maya," she said simply, moving to clean his desk area. Her eyes inadvertently fell on his computer screen, where the impossible algorithm code was displayed in all its maddening complexity. Khalil noticed her pause, her cloth hovering over the surface of his desk. "Problem?" he asked sarcastically. "Don't worry, you won't break anything. Though at this point, I'm not sure it could get any worse." Ma's eyes were fixed on the screen, her brow furrowed in concentration. This is quantum encryption, she said quietly, almost to herself. Khalil's head snapped up. Excuse me? She seemed to realize she'd spoken aloud and quickly looked away. Nothing, sir. I should finish and let you work. But Khalil was standing now, his full attention focused on her. No. What did you just say about quantum encryption? Maya's cheeks flushed slightly. I recognize some of the mathematical patterns. I used to study computer science. Used to? Khalil moved closer, his business instincts suddenly alert before becoming a janitor. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Life doesn't always follow the plan. Mr. Al-Rashid, there was steel in her voice now, and Khalil realized he'd touched a nerve. Good. In his experience, people revealed their true nature when pushed. This algorithm, he said, gesturing at the screen, has stumped teams of PhD mathematicians for 3 months. It's cost my company millions. But you think you recognize it? Maya's eyes met his directly. I didn't say I could solve it. I just said I recognized the pattern structure. Khalil felt a familiar thrill, the same sensation he got when sensing weakness in a business negotiation. Here was an opportunity to either expose this woman's pretensions or something else entirely. Tell you what, he said, his voice taking on the smooth, dangerous tone that preceded his most ruthless business moves. If you're so confident about patterns, here's a challenge. He pulled out his phone and transferred funds with a few quick taps. I just put $155 million into an escrow account. Solve this algorithm and it's yours. Maya stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. Mr. Al-Rashid, I think you're not being serious. I'm always serious about money, Khalil replied, his dark eyes glinting with a mixture of amusement and challenge. You have 1 hour. Solve what MIT's finest couldn't and walk away richer than most small countries. Fail and admit you're just another janitor with delusions of grandeur. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Mia's cleaning cart seemed to mock the absurdity of the situation. A billionaire offering a fortune to a woman who cleaned toilets for minimum wage. Why would you do this? Mia asked quietly. Khalil shrugged, though his casual gesture belied the intensity in his eyes. Call it entertainment. I'm tired of watching expensive experts fail. Maybe it's time to see what happens when someone with nothing to lose takes a shot. Maya looked at the computer screen again, then back at him. Something shifted in her expression, a hardening of resolve that transformed her face completely. When she straightened her shoulders, she no longer looked like a janitor at all. 1 hour? She asked. 1 hour. Maya moved to his chair and sat down with a confidence that made Khalil's pulse quicken. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for just a moment before she began typing with a speed and precision that immediately told him he'd made a terrible mistake or discovered something extraordinary. Maya's fingers flew across the keyboard with the fluid grace of a concert pianist, her previous deference completely abandoned. The transformation was so complete that Khalil wondered if he was witnessing an elaborate con or something far more intriguing. The core issue isn't the encryption itself, she murmured, her voice taking on a completely different cadence. Analytical, confident, with undertones of excitement. It's the quantum entanglement verification protocol. Whoever designed this was thinking in classical terms about quantum behavior. Khalil moved behind her chair, watching lines of code appear and disappear faster than he could follow. The scent of her shampoo, something clean and understated, reached him, and he found himself oddly distracted by the graceful curve of her neck as she worked. You're debugging 3 months of work in real time, he observed, his voice closer to her ear than strictly professional. I'm not debugging, Maya replied without looking up. I'm rebuilding. Your team was trying to force a square peg into a round hole. The mathematical foundation was flawed from the beginning. Her confidence was mesmerizing. This wasn't the hesitant janitor from 20 minutes ago. This was someone who spoke the language of advanced mathematics as fluently as she breathed. Where did you learn to code like this? Khalil asked, genuinely curious now. Maya's hands paused for just a fraction of a second. MIT Computer Science and Applied Mathematics double major. Graduated summa cum laude. The casual way she dropped this information while completely rewriting his company's most challenging project struck Khalil as either massively arrogant or entirely truthful. Either way, he was fascinated. MIT, he repeated. And you're working as a janitor because sometimes brilliant people make catastrophically stupid personal decisions, Maya said, her voice tight with controlled emotion, like trusting the wrong person with everything they built. There was a story there, and Khalil found himself wanting to hear it. In his experience, the most interesting people were those who'd fallen from great heights and survived. Betray, he guessed. Maya's typing never slowed, but he caught the almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes. Business partner, also my fiancé. Amazing how efficiently someone can destroy your life when they have access to both your heart and your bank accounts. The bitter edge in her voice was unmistakable. Khalil felt an unexpected surge of anger toward a man he'd never met. He stole from you? He stole everything, Maya said simply. Company, patents, reputation, investment capital. By the time I realized what was happening, he'd positioned himself as the genius behind our innovations, and me as the pretty face who'd gotten lucky with connections. Khalil studied her profile as she worked. The strong line of her jaw, the focused intensity of her expression, the way she commanded the computer like it was an extension of herself. Nothing about Maya suggested someone who'd gotten anywhere based on looks alone. Your patents? He asked. Blockchain security protocols, 3 of them, now worth about 200 million combined. Mia's laugh held no humor. Turns out love makes you sign documents without reading them carefully. Jesus, Khalil breathed. He'd heard of similar cases, brilliant innovators destroyed by trusted partners, but hearing it from someone currently earning minimum wage while casually revolutionizing his company's code created a cognitive dissonance he wasn't prepared for. Almost finished, Maya announced, her voice returning to its professional tone. Your quantum verification system needed to account for temporal variance in entangled particles. The algorithm was assuming static behavior in a dynamic environment. Khalil blinked. I understood maybe half of that. You don't need to understand it, Maya said with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. You just need it to work. The smile transformed her completely. Suddenly he could see the confident MIT graduate she'd once been, the brilliant innovator who'd built something worth millions. It also made him acutely aware of how beautiful she was when she wasn't hiding behind the protective shell of someone society preferred to ignore. There, Maya said, leaning back in his chair. Run the verification protocol. Khalil moved to look over her shoulder at the screen. The code was elegant in a way that spoke to mathematical beauty rather than mere functionality. Even with his limited programming knowledge, he could see the difference between this and the clunky attempts his team had produced. He executed the verification sequence, hardly daring to breathe. Numbers scrolled across the screen in patterns that had eluded his experts for months. And then, impossibly, incredibly, the system displayed 2 words that had become the holy grail of his company's efforts. Verification successful. Holy shit, Khalil whispered. Mia stood up from his chair, smoothing down her gray uniform with hands that were perfectly steady. The escrow account information should arrive in your email within the next few minutes. The transfer will complete automatically once the system passes all verification tests. Khalil stared at her. You actually did it. I told you I recognized the pattern structure, Maya said mildly, as if casually earning $155 million was a typical Tuesday night activity. Maya, Khalil said, and something in his voice made her look at him directly. This is going to sound insane, but I need to ask. Are you really a janitor? She tilted her head, considering the question. I really clean offices for 8 hours a night, 5 days a week. I really live in a studio apartment in Queens that costs 60% of my income. I really haven't used my MIT education professionally in 3 years. But you're not really a janitor, Khalil pressed. Maya's smile turned sad. Mr. Rashid, when you lose everything that defined who you were, you become whatever pays the bills. Tonight I was a janitor who happened to solve your algorithm. Tomorrow I'll go back to being a janitor who's rich enough to quit but probably won't, because honestly I have no idea what else to do with myself. The vulnerability in her admission hit him unexpectedly. Here was a woman who just demonstrated intellectual capabilities that would make her invaluable to any tech company in the world. And she sounded lost. "You could come work for me?" Khalil said impulsively. Maya laughed, but not unkindly. "Mr. Al-Rashid, you just handed me enough money to retire. Why would I want to work for someone who settles corporate disputes by throwing around nine-figure challenges?" "Because," Khalil said, moving closer to her, "I suspect you're the kind of person who needs to create things, and I'm the kind of person who makes creation possible." For a moment, something electric passed between them. Maya's eyes widened slightly as if she was seeing him, really seeing him for the first time. Khalil felt his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the fascinating woman standing in his office at midnight, having just turned his world upside down. Then Maya stepped back, breaking the spell. "I should finish my rounds," she said quietly. "Congratulations on solving your algorithm problem, Mr. Al-Rashid." She moved toward her cleaning cart, but Khalil caught her arm gently. "Maya, have dinner with me tomorrow night." She looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. "You're asking your janitor on a date?" "I'm asking the most brilliant woman I've ever met to dinner," Khalil corrected. "The fact that I met her while she was emptying my trash can is just interesting timing." Maya studied his face for a long moment. "Mr. Al-Rashid, we both know this is a terrible idea." "Probably," Khalil agreed. "But I haven't been this intrigued by anyone in years, and after tonight, I suspect you might be worth a few terrible ideas." 24 hours later, Khalil found himself in the unprecedented position of being nervous. The Michelin-starred restaurant he'd chosen for dinner suddenly seemed too formal, too much like the ostentatious displays of wealth that had probably surrounded Maya during her previous life, and that had ultimately betrayed her. He'd changed restaurants 3 times before settling on a quiet Italian place in the village that was expensive enough to show respect but intimate enough to actually allow conversation. As he waited at their reserved table, checking his watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes, he wondered if Maya would even show up. The hostess approached with a woman Khalil almost didn't recognize. Gone was the gray uniform and practical ponytail. Maya wore a simple black dress that was elegant without being flashy, her dark hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She moved with the same quiet confidence he'd glimpsed the night before, but now it wasn't hidden beneath the protective anonymity of service work. She was absolutely stunning. "Mr. Al-Rashid," Maya said as she reached the table, and there was amusement in her voice at his obvious surprise. "Maya," he managed, standing to pull out her chair. "You look incredible. You look like someone who wasn't expecting his janitor to clean up well," she replied with a slight smile. Khalil felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I deserved that." As they settled into their seats, Khalil found himself studying her more openly. The woman across from him bore little resemblance to the service worker he'd met last night. Her posture was different, her expressions more animated. It was as if she'd been wearing a costume that she'd finally taken off. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said after they'd ordered wine. "Did you really have $155 million just sitting around to throw at a random challenge?" Khalil laughed, and the sound was more relaxed than he'd felt in months. "Define sitting around. But yes, I could access that amount relatively quickly." "Why, that specific number?" "It seemed large enough to be meaningful, but not so large as to be impossible," Maya said thoughtfully. "I was trying to calculate how much someone like you might consider worth the risk of looking foolish." "Someone like me," Khalil repeated. "You mean arrogant and reckless?" Maya tilted her head, studying him. "I was thinking more like successful enough to take calculated risks and confident enough to bet against conventional wisdom." Her assessment was surprisingly generous, and Khalil felt something warm unfurl in his chest. "That's a nicer interpretation than I expected. I'm generally not in the business of insulting men who've just made me financially independent," Maya said with dry humor. "Though I have to admit, the way you offered that challenge was impressively dramatic." "Impressively dramatic," Khalil mused. "I'll take that as a compliment. You should. Most people with your kind of money are boring. All calculation, no instinct." Maya took a sip of wine, and something in her expression shifted. "Actually, that's not fair. Most people I knew with money were boring, Past tense. Tell me about him, Khalil said quietly. Your partner. Maya's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around her wine glass. David, what do you want to know? Whatever you're willing to share. For a moment, Maya looked like she might deflect the question. Then she seemed to make a decision. We met in graduate school. Brilliant programmer, charming, came from money, but acted like he'd rather be judged on merit than family connections. I thought that meant he had integrity. Her voice remained steady, but Khalil could hear the careful control beneath it. We started working together on blockchain protocols during our final year. The chemistry was incredible, both intellectual and personal. By graduation, we were engaged and had our first provisional patent. What changed? Maya was quiet for so long that Khalil wondered if she would answer. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I found out he'd been systematically documenting our work sessions, editing the recordings to make it appear like he was leading all the innovation while I was just following along. He'd been building a case that the intellectual property was primarily his for over a year. Jesus. The patents were filed in both our names, but the supporting documentation told a different story. When our startup began attracting serious investment interest, David used that documentation to convince investors that I was a liability. Brilliant, but unstable, prone to taking credit for collaborative work. Khalil felt anger building in his chest. How did he get away with it? Maya's laugh was bitter. He was very good at his job, and I was very good at trusting him. By the time I realized what was happening, he had investors, board members, and even some of our employees convinced that I was delusional. Your own employees? David was charismatic. He made people feel valued, appreciated. When he started suggesting that I was becoming possessive about work that was clearly collaborative, they wanted to believe him. Maya met Khalil's eyes directly. It's amazing how quickly people will accept a narrative that absolves them of having to choose sides. Khalil thought about his own employees, his own board members. How easy would it be for someone with the right skills to manipulate perceptions? Probably easier than he wanted to admit. What happened to the patents? Bought out of my stake for significantly less than market value. The board voted. David abstained, of course, to avoid conflict of interest. Maya's tone was conversational, as if she were discussing the weather. I was given 30 days to accept their offer or face a lengthy legal battle with people who had significantly more resources than a suddenly unemployed computer scientist. You could have fought. With what money? David had made sure I looked unstable and potentially litigious. No law firm wanted to take the case on contingency, and I couldn't afford to pay up front. Maya shrugged. Sometimes the house wins, Mr. Al-Rashid. Khalil studied her face, looking for signs of self-pity or bitterness. Instead, he saw something that looked like hard-won acceptance. You started over, he observed. I tried to, but reputation follows you in tech. David had been very thorough in his character assassination. Every job interview felt like an interrogation about my previous difficulties with collaborative work environments. So you became a janitor. I became invisible, Maya corrected. There's a difference. As a janitor, no one expects brilliance. No one wants to hear your ideas. No one asks about your past or your potential. You just exist in the spaces between other people's important lives. The sadness in her voice was almost unbearable. Khalil found himself wanting to find David and make him pay for every slight, every theft, every moment of doubt he'd planted in Mia's mind. But you're not invisible, Khalil said. Not to me. Mia looked at him for a long moment. Mr. El-Rashid. Khalil, he corrected. And I mean it. What I saw last night wasn't just technical skill. It was artistry. The way you approach that problem, the elegance of your solution, that's not something you can fake or steal. Khalil, Maya said carefully, and his name sounded different in her voice. Warmer, more personal. I appreciate what you're saying, but have dinner with me again tomorrow night, Khalil interrupted. Maya blinked. We're having dinner right now. Different dinner, different restaurant, same conversation, but deeper. Khalil leaned forward slightly. I want to know more about how your mind works. I want to understand what drives someone to rebuild their entire life from the ground up. And honestly, I want to spend more time with the most interesting person I've met in years. You barely know me. Then let me fix that. Maya stared at him, and Khalil could practically see her brain working through the implications, the risks, the potential complications. Finally, she spoke. This is complicated, Khalil. We come from completely different worlds now. 3 days ago, that might have been true, Khalil said. But yesterday, you made yourself $155 million richer. Which world do you belong to now? Mia considered this. I honestly don't know. Then let's figure it out together. Something shifted in Mia's expression, a crack in the armor she'd built around herself. Okay, she said quietly. One more dinner. Good, Khalil said, and his smile was genuinely warm. Because I have a feeling we're just getting started, as if on cue. Maya's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and froze. What is it? Khalil asked. Ma's face had gone pale. David, she said quietly. He wants to meet. The coffee shop David had chosen was deliberately neutral, a chain establishment in Midtown that suggested neither wealth nor poverty, just carefully calculated anonymity. Mia sat across from the man who had once been her entire world, studying the face she'd once kissed goodnight every evening, searching for any trace of the person she'd thought she'd loved. David looked exactly the same. Perfectly groomed brown hair, expensive but understated clothing, the kind of smile that had once made her feel like she was the only person in the room. Now it made her skin crawl. You look well, Maya, David said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of warm concern that had once comforted her during late-night coding sessions. Really? Well, cut the David. What do you want? His eyebrows rose in mock surprise. Straight to the point. I always admired that about you. Maya felt her jaw clench. You have 30 minutes before I leave. David leaned back in his chair, studying her with the calculating expression she'd learned to recognize too late. I heard about your recent windfall. $155 million for solving an algorithm. Impressive. The words hit Maya like ice water. How did you hear about that? Maya, you solved a problem that had been stumping Al Rashid Financial for months. Word travels fast in our circles. Our circles? Maya repeated flatly. I clean offices for minimum wage. David, we don't travel in the same circles anymore. Don't you? David's smile took on a predatory edge because, from where I'm sitting, it looks like you found yourself a very wealthy patron. Khalil al-Rashid is quite the catch. Maya's blood turned cold. Have you been watching me? I keep tabs on former business associates, David said smoothly. It's just good practice. And imagine my surprise when I discovered that my brilliant former partner was working as a janitor in the very building where one of my potential investors operates. Potential investors. David's smile widened. Al, Rashid Financial has been evaluating our latest blockchain innovations for a possible partnership. Fascinating coincidence, don't you think? Maya stared at him, her mind racing through the implications. You orchestrated this? I orchestrated what? You getting a job cleaning his office? You solving his algorithm? You having dinner with him last night? David shook his head with false regret. Maya, you always did have a tendency toward paranoid thinking. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced that for a moment, Maya felt the familiar doubt creeping in. Then she remembered Khalil's reaction to her solution, the genuine surprise and respect in his eyes. David couldn't have faked that. What do you want? She asked again. David pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table. I want you to look at this. The screen showed a contract, dense legal language that Maya's trained eye could parse quickly. It was a non-disclosure and non-compete agreement specifically related to quantum encryption algorithms. This is my signature, Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. From our original partnership agreement, David confirmed. Section 15, subsection C, any innovations related to quantum computing or encryption developed during our professional relationship remain subject to joint intellectual property claims for a period of 5 years post-dissolution. Maya felt the world tilt. I never agreed to that. Your signature suggests otherwise. David's voice remained pleasant, conversational. Of course, at the time, quantum encryption seemed like a distant possibility. We were focused on blockchain protocols. You added this clause after I signed. Prove it. David's smile was razor sharp now. The document is properly notarized, legally binding, and filed with the appropriate authorities. Any court would uphold it. Maya's hands were shaking now, and she pressed them flat against the table to hide it. Even if this were legitimate, I didn't develop anything for you. I solved Khalil's algorithm independently. Did you? David tilted his head thoughtfully. Because I have documentation suggesting that some of the foundational work you used in that solution was developed during our partnership, specifically the temporal variance calculations that made your breakthrough possible. He was right, and they both knew it. The mathematical framework she'd used had been part of theoretical work they'd done together 2 years ago. Work that had seemed purely academic at the time. You can't prove I used that framework. I don't need to prove it, Maya. I just need to suggest it. David leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. Think about what happens when Al Rashed Financial discovers that their brilliant new consultant might be legally obligated to share her innovations with a competitor. Think about how that affects their willingness to work with you. Maya felt sick. Khalil isn't working with me professionally, isn't he? David's eyebrows rose again. Because my sources suggest he offered you a position with his company just yesterday, and the timing of your dinner date certainly suggests a professional relationship with personal benefits. The way he said it made Maya feel dirty. You're disgusting. I'm practical. David's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. You cost me 18 months of development time, Maya. 18 months of having to recreate innovations that were rightfully mine. I'm simply recouping my losses. Those innovations were mine. Prove it, David said again, and the repetition was like a slap. In court with lawyers while Al Rashed Financial watches their potential partner become embroiled in a lengthy intellectual property dispute. Maya stared at him, understanding finally dawning. You want money? I want what's fair. 50% of your recent windfall seems reasonable. $77.5 million as compensation for the foundational work that made your solution possible. And if I refuse, David's smile returned bright and terrible. Then I file an injunction preventing you from using any algorithms that incorporate shared intellectual property. I leaked the story to the tech press about the legal dispute surrounding Al Rashid's quantum encryption solution. And I make sure every potential employer in the industry knows that working with Maya Chen comes with significant legal risks. The threat was comprehensive and devastating. Even if Maya could eventually prove her case in court, the process would destroy any chance she had of rebuilding her career or her relationship with Khalil. You bastard, she whispered. I'm a businessman, David corrected. And unlike you, I learn from our past mistakes. I don't let emotions cloud my judgment anymore. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message. Khalil's name appeared on the screen. Hope your meeting goes well. Dinner tomorrow still on. The simple message with its assumption that she was strong enough to handle whatever David threw at her almost broke her heart. Khalil had no idea what kind of legal and professional nightmare he was about to inherit by association. I need time to think, Maya said. Of course. David stood smoothly, leaving exact change for his coffee on the table. You have 48 hours to transfer the funds. After that, I file the paperwork and contact the press. He paused at her shoulder, his voice dropping to that intimate whisper again. Oh, and Maya, you might want to think carefully about what you tell Al Rashid about this conversation. Men like him don't appreciate complications, especially complicated women who come with legal baggage. David walked away, leaving Maya alone with the contract and the devastating realization that even her escape from his influence had been incomplete. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Khalil. Actually, why wait? Free for dinner tonight? Maya stared at the screen, her heart breaking. She typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on something's come up. Rain check. The response came immediately. Everything okay? Maya typed yes and immediately deleted it. Then no and deleted that too. Finally, she turned off her phone and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving the contract on the table like the poison it was. She had 48 hours to choose between destroying Khalil's trust or destroying her future. Either way, David would win again. Khalil stared at his phone for the 5th time in an hour, willing Maya to respond to his messages. Her sudden coldness after David's meeting felt wrong. Not like the confident woman who'd solved his impossible algorithm or the vulnerable one who'd shared her story over dinner. Something was very wrong. He was still debating whether to respect her space or track her down when Marcus knocked on his office door. "Sir, there's a David Chen here to see you. Says it's about a potential partnership opportunity." Khalil's blood ran cold. Chen. Maya's ex-fiancé had a different last name, but the timing couldn't be coincidental. "Send him in," Khalil said, his voice carefully neutral. The man who entered his office was everything Maya had described, and nothing like what Khalil had expected. Handsome in a clean-cut, unthreatening way, with the kind of practice charm that set Khalil's business instincts on high alert. "Mr. Al-Rashid," David said, extending his hand with a warm smile. "David Chen, CEO of Chen Innovations. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me." Khalil shook the offered hand, noting the expensive watch and manicured nails. "Mr. Chen, I understand you have a business proposition." "I do, but first I feel I should mention that I know Maya quite well." "Personal and professional history?" The statement was clearly designed to provoke a reaction. Khalil kept his expression neutral. "Ms. Chen is an associate of mine." "Associate," David repeated thoughtfully. "Interesting way to describe someone you're dating." "My personal life isn't relevant to this meeting," Khalil said coolly. "What exactly are you proposing?" David pulled out a tablet and placed it on Khalil's desk. "I'm proposing that you might want to reconsider your association with Maya before it becomes professionally problematic." The screen showed legal documents, contracts, and what appeared to be development logs. Khalil scanned them quickly, his business law background allowing him to parse the essential elements. "This appears to be an intellectual property dispute," Khalil observed. "More than that, it's documentation proving that the algorithm Maya solved for you incorporates foundational work developed during our partnership. Work that remains subject to joint ownership under our original agreement." Khalil studied the documentation more carefully. On the surface, it appeared legitimate, properly notarized, legally formatted with Maya's signature clearly visible. But something felt off. "You're claiming ownership of Mia's solution. I'm claiming ownership of the mathematical framework that made her solution possible," David corrected smoothly. "The temporal variance calculations, the quantum entanglement protocols, all developed during our joint research period." "And you're telling me this because?" David's smile widened. "Because I assume you don't want your company embroiled in a lengthy intellectual property dispute, especially not over technology that might be legally questionable." Khalil leaned back in his chair, studying David with the cold assessment he reserved for hostile negotiations. "What do you want for you?" "Nothing. This is purely about Maya and our unresolved business relationship." David's tone remained friendly, but his eyes were calculating. "I simply thought you should know what you're getting involved with. How considerate of you." "I try to be." David collected his tablet and stood. "Of course, if Maya has misrepresented the legal status of her work to you, that could create complications, especially if your company plans to commercialize her algorithm." The threat was subtle but clear. Khalil felt anger building in his chest, not at the legal complications, but at the casual way this man was trying to destroy Maya's life again. "Mr. Chen," Khalil said, his voice taking on the dangerous edge that made his board members nervous. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, but I should mention that Al-Rashid Financial has excellent legal counsel. If there are intellectual property concerns, I'm confident we can resolve them appropriately." Something flickered in David's eyes. Surprised, perhaps, that his intimidation tactics weren't working as expected. "Of course," David said smoothly. "I just thought you should be aware of the potential complications that come with Maya's involvement in any project." After David left, Khalil sat alone in his office, staring at the legal implications of what he'd just learned. If David's claims were legitimate, Mia's algorithm could indeed be legally problematic. But something about the entire interaction felt wrong. His phone rang. Marcus again. "Sir, I have Dr. Elizabeth Warren from MIT on the line. She says it's about Maya Chan and that it's urgent." Khalil took the call immediately. "Dr. Warren, Mr. Al-Rashid, I apologize for calling unexpectedly. Maya was one of my brightest students, and I understand she recently solved a significant algorithm for your company." She did. I also understand that her former partner, David, has contacted you about intellectual property concerns. Khalil's pulse quickened. How did you know that? Because David Chen has spent the last 3 years systematically contacting anyone who showed professional interest in Maya. He uses the same legal documentation, the same intimidation tactics, and the same goal to ensure that Maya remains professionally isolated. The contracts are fake. The contracts are real but incomplete. What David doesn't share is the subsequent documentation that invalidates his claims. Documentation that Maya developed independently after their partnership dissolved, and that clearly establishes her sole ownership of the relevant mathematical frameworks. Dr. Warren's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades in academic intellectual property disputes. Mr. Al-Rashid David Chen is a brilliant programmer, but Maya is a once-in-a-generation mathematical innovator. What she created for you is entirely her own work. Why hasn't Mia defended herself? Because David is very good at making the legal battle seem costlier than surrender. And because after 3 years of professional sabotage, Maya started believing that maybe she didn't deserve to win. Khalil felt his anger crystallize into something cold and focused. Dr. Warren, would you be willing to provide testimony about the legitimate ownership of Maya's work? I'd be delighted to. In fact, I've been waiting 3 years for someone to finally call David's bluff. After ending the call, Khalil immediately contacted his head legal counsel. Within 2 hours, he had a comprehensive strategy for not only defending Ma's intellectual property rights, but exposing David's pattern of fraudulent intimidation. The sun was setting when he finally drove to Mia's Queens apartment building. She answered her door looking exhausted and defeated, wearing old jeans and an oversized sweater that seemed designed to hide her from the world. "Call," she said quietly. "You shouldn't be here. David came to see me today," Khalil said without preamble. Maya's face went pale. "What did he tell you?" "What?" "A very convincing story about shared intellectual property and legal complications." Khalil stepped closer. "A story that would have worked perfectly if I hadn't also spoken to Dr. Warren from MIT. Maya's eyes widened. "Elizabeth called you?" "She called to warn me about David's pattern of sabotaging your career and to offer testimony that your algorithm is entirely your own work." Maya stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. "But the contracts are incomplete. The documentation David uses to intimidate people conveniently omits the subsequent agreements that established your independent ownership of the relevant mathematical frameworks." "I don't understand." Khalil reached for her hands, noting how cold they were, despite the warm apartment. "Maya, you've been legally in the right this entire time. David has been committing fraud for 3 years, and no one ever called him on it because his victims couldn't afford to fight back." Maya's legs seemed to give out, and she sank onto her couch. "That's not possible. It's not only possible, it's documented. My legal team spent this afternoon reviewing your original partnership dissolution. David has no legitimate claim to your work. But the companies that wouldn't hire me were scared off by lies." Khalil sat beside her, wanting to pull her into his arms, but sensing she needed space to process. "Maya, David has been systematically destroying your reputation with legal threats. He knew he couldn't back up in court." Mia was quiet for so long that Khalil wondered if she'd heard him. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. 3 years. I've spent 3 years believing I deserved what happened to me. You didn't deserve any of it." Maya looked at him, and Khalil saw something breaking open in her expression. Not breaking apart, but breaking free. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we destroy him," Khalil said simply. "My legal team is filing charges for fraud, defamation, and intentional interference with business relationships. By tomorrow morning, David Chen's career will be over." "And us?" The question hung in the air between them. Khalil reached for her hand again, this time intertwining their fingers. "Us," he said quietly, "is entirely up to you. But Maya, I need you to know something. What I feel for you has nothing to do with algorithms or business or solving problems. It has everything to do with the fact that you're the most remarkable woman I've ever met." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "Khalil, I've been so scared. For 3 years, I've been scared of hoping for anything better." "You don't have to be scared anymore," Khalil said. moving closer to her on the couch. I'm not going anywhere. When Mia finally kissed him, it tasted like freedom. 6 months later, Mia stood in the boardroom of Chen Innovations, watching David's former employees pack their belongings into cardboard boxes. The federal investigation had been swift and thorough. Once one victim came forward with proper legal support, dozens of others had emerged from the shadows. Hard to believe it's really over, Doctor, Warren said, joining Maya at the window that overlooked Manhattan's financial district. Sometimes I still wake up expecting it to have been a dream, Maya admitted. Good dreams have been rare the last few years. The older woman smiled. How are things with your young billionaire? Mia's cheeks warmed. Khalil isn't that young, and things are complicated. Complicated how? Last I heard, he'd offered you a position as Chief Innovation Officer with a salary that would make most CEOs weep with envy. He did. Maya sighed, and I turned him down. Dr. Warren's eyebrows rose. Dare I ask why? Because I need to know I can succeed on my own before I build a life with someone else. I spent 3 years believing I was broken. I can't jump from that into depending on Khalil's success to define my worth. And what does Khalil think about this decision? Maya smiled despite herself. He said, and I quote, "That's the most beautifully stubborn thing I've ever heard. When you're ready to take over the tech industry, I'll be here." Sounds like a keeper. He is. Maya's smile widened. Did I mention he helped me secure funding for my own startup? As an investor, not a boyfriend. Very strict boundaries. How's that going? 3 patents filed, 2 major clients signed, and a development team of 12 brilliant women who've all been burned by men like David at some point in their careers. Mia's voice carried a satisfaction that had been absent for years. We're calling it Phoenix Innovations. Perfect name. Mia was about to respond when her phone buzzed with a text from Khalil. Dinner tonight, I have news. She texted back, good news or bad news? Depends on how you feel about marriage proposals. Maya stared at her phone, her heart stopping mid-beat. Dr. Warren, reading over her shoulder, laughed out loud. Well, the older woman said, I'd say that settles the question of whether he's willing to wait. Maya's hands were shaking as she typed. That's not funny. Khalil's response came immediately. Who said I was joking? Dinner at 8. Maya excused herself from Dr. Warren and called Khalil directly. He answered on the first ring. Please tell me you're not actually planning to propose tonight, Maya said without preamble. I'm actually planning to propose right now, Khalil replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Over the phone seems less romantic, but I'm surprisingly nervous about waiting until dinner. Kal Maya Chen, you are the most brilliant, stubborn, incredible woman I've ever known. You've rebuilt your entire life from nothing, created a company that's already changing the industry, and somehow managed to fall in love with a workaholic billionaire who didn't know what happiness was until he met you. Maya felt tears starting to build behind her eyes. You make me want to be better than I am, Khalil continued. You make me laugh. You challenge every assumption I have about the world, and you solve impossible problems before breakfast. I love your sarcasm, your determination, your terrible habit of working until 3 hours in the morning, and the way you look at me like I'm worth something more than my bank account balance. Khalil, Maya whispered. I'm not asking you to give up your independence or your company or your stubborn refusal to accept help. You don't need. I'm asking you to build something with me that's bigger than either of us could create alone. Maya was crying now, standing in David's former office, surrounded by the ruins of the life he'd tried to build on stolen dreams. So, Khalil said quietly, Maya Chen, will you marry me? You can't propose over the phone, Maya managed through her tears. I can do whatever I want. I'm a billionaire, remember? His tone was teasing, but she could hear the nervous edge underneath. Besides, you still haven't answered the question. Maya wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. Ask me again at dinner. Is that a yes? That's a bring a ring and find out. Khalil's laughter was warm and relieved. Challenge accepted. 8 hours later, Maya sat across from Khalil in the same Italian restaurant where they had had their first real conversation. He'd chosen their original table, and the familiar setting made everything feel like coming full circle. Nervous? Maya asked, noting how Khalil kept checking his watch. Terrified, he admitted. I've negotiated billion-dollar deals with less anxiety than this. Good, Maya said with a smile. I'd hate to think I was easy. Easy is the last word I'd use to describe you. Khalil reached across the table and took her hand. Ready for your official proposal? Actually, Maya said, I have something to say first. Khalil's expression grew concerned. That sounds ominous. 6 months ago, I was cleaning your office and believing I was worthless, Maya said quietly. You saw something in me that I'd forgotten existed. You didn't just give me money or opportunity. You gave me back my sense of possibility. Maya, I'm not finished. She squeezed his hand. You could have used my desperation to make me dependent on you. Instead, you pushed me to become independent again. You could have made our relationship about gratitude or obligation. Instead, you made it about choice. Maya stood up from her chair and moved around the table, pulling something from her purse as she went. So, before you propose to me, she said, dropping to one knee beside Khalil's chair, I'm proposing to you. Khalil's mouth fell open as Maya opened a small velvet box containing a simple platinum band. Khalil al-Rashid, Maya said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. You are infuriating, generous, brilliant, and absolutely terrible at taking no for an answer. You've made me remember who I was before David, and you've helped me become someone even better. She took a breath. You challenge me. You support me. You make me laugh. And you've never once made me feel like I need to be smaller to make room for your ego. I love your ridiculous dramatic gestures, your terrible habit of throwing money at problems, and the way you look at me like I hung the moon. Maya, Khalil whispered, I'm asking you to build a life with me. Maya continued, not as my savior or my patron or my business partner, but as my equal, as my best friend, as the person I choose to love for the rest of my life. She held up the ring. So, Khalil al-Rashid, will you marry me? For a moment, Khalil just stared at her. Then he started laughing. Deep, joyful laughter that drew stares from other diners and made Mia's heart sing. Yes, he said, pulling her up from the floor and into his arms. Yes, absolutely. Definitely, yes. As he kissed her, Maya felt the last of her carefully constructed walls finally crumble completely. When they broke apart, Khalil was grinning. Though I should mention, he said, I also brought a ring. Show me, Maya challenged. Khalil pulled out his own small box, revealing a stunning solitaire that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated. Maya Chen, he said formally, will you marry me back? That depends, Mia replied with a grin. Are you prepared for a lifetime of me being right about algorithms? I'm prepared for a lifetime of you being right about everything, Khalil said, as long as you're prepared for a lifetime of me pretending to argue about it. Deal, Maya said and kissed him again. Later, as they walked hand in hand through the city that had witnessed both her downfall and her resurrection, Mia reflected on the strange turns life could take. A year ago, she'd been invisible, broken, convinced that her story was over. Now she was engaged to a man who saw her as she truly was, running a company built on her own terms, surrounded by people who valued her mind and her heart. Any regrets? Khalil asked as if reading her thoughts. Maya considered the question seriously. About David, about the 3 years, about everything that led me to that office building on the night I met you, about any of it. Maya stopped walking and turned to face him. Not a single one, she said firmly, because every terrible thing that happened led me to you. And this us is worth all of it, even the part where I was an arrogant ass who challenged a janitor to solve impossible algorithms. Especially that part, Maya said with a laugh. Though for the record, I was never really a janitor. No, I was a brilliant woman waiting for the right moment to remind the world who she was. So Maya stood on her tiptoes to kiss him one more time. Thank you for being my moment, Khalil al-Rashid. Thank you for being mine, Maya Chen. As they walked home together, planning a wedding and a future that neither of them could have imagined 6 months earlier, Maya realized that sometimes the best love stories begin with the ending of everything you thought you wanted. Sometimes you have to lose yourself completely to discover who you were meant to become. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find someone who sees your potential even when you've forgotten it exists. Someone who doesn't save you, but stands beside you while you save yourself. Maya squeezed Khalil's hand and smiled at the city lights ahead of them, ready for whatever impossible challenges tomorrow might bring.